From Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett, and I'm taking advantage of a lovely fall day to prepare the soil for planting my peas next spring. Not only will I plant peas in here, but spinach and turnips and onion sets. Well, there's not only soil preparation I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to dig those Jerusalem artichokes. I'm going to force some rhubarb that I was going to do when it snowed last week. I'm going to dig my parsnips, and in my plant clinic, I have a very lanky Coleus. Now let's go back to this soil preparation for a minute. You notice how easy it is to dig the soil at this time of year. Not a whole lot of moisture in it. It's not muddy at all. It's a good time of the year to work the soil. You notice how I'm digging. I'm digging some peat moss in here, but notice that the soil that I'm throwing goes forward onto a bank ahead of me. I can take out as small a bite as I want to with my spade to make this as easy an operation as I desire, because no matter how big a bite I take, I'm not lifting the whole garden. I'm just taking a part of the soil, and then I instinctively sort of give it a crack with the back of the spade, and that breaks up those clods. Now next spring, well, let's rake this off a little bit, but next spring I'll show you where we're going to plant this. You take your rake now, prepare your soil bed. Now you may not have a raised garden such as I do, but you can do this along one edge of your garden so that you can stand in the path without getting your feet muddy at all. Next spring, come right along here and put in your peas or spinach or whatever you want to plant. Now what I do is simply drop the peas on the surface in the spring, just use my finger and poke them in the ground. Nothing could be easier. So this is what you should do now. Prepare your soil for the first spring planting, because then it's going to be too darn muddy to get out and do it later. Well, you've heard me talk about the fact that we have so-called hardy chrysanthemums. Well, hardy depends upon where you live, and I think that most chrysanthemums should be called garden chrysanthemums because they're hardy in some areas and not in others. And I have right here a garden chrysanthemum. This is a variety which I bought a year ago, kept it through last winter, took off some of the small cuttings from the base of it in the spring, and here we've grown a beautiful plant which blossomed this year. Now let's just say that this is a choice variety, at least it's one that I want to keep over. So what I'm going to do now is cut off those old stalks, and we're going to take this plant over to the cold frame. Now you notice that after I get through chopping this off, there are a number of fine young stems coming out of the ground. And it's these stems, such as that one right there, which will be one of the plants for next year. And from this one plant, I can easily get 25 or 30 nice plants for next year. Now, if I left that right here in the garden, it might survive. It might not survive. So I'm going to give it special protection right over in my cold frame. Now we'll set this down for a minute and tip the back of this cold frame back for you. Now, put a plant like that right over in here. We can put 2 or 3 more plants in there, fill some soil up and around them, and in this protected environment, that plant is going to be neither hot nor severely cold. It's just going to stay cool all winter, and next spring I can divide it up and have all the plants I want. Now let's look at some of these other plants that I have here in the cold frame. Now here's some dianthus. This is a lovely foliage which stays bluish green all winter. Next to it we have Canterbury bells. Farther over on the other side are foxglove. All of these plants can stand cold, but they can't stand wet and cold combined with freezing and thawing action. It raises havoc with the crowns of the plants. But in here, I can put the cover over the cold frame in the winter, keep it unevenly cold, and keep that excess moisture off. Now what I'll do is wait until the soil freezes perfectly cold and hard, and I'll put some marsh hay around it and let them put the cover on for the winter. I see another nice chrysanthemum over in here. This was the white one, like called Baby's Tears. Now this one you see still has the stalks on it, but I want you to look down at the base. See those lovely young plants started there? And a wonderful thing this is to save over for another year. Just cut off those old stems because they have finished their period for the year. Such a plant as that, go right over here into the cold frame, and there it can sit for the winter. Now let's go up and we'll do some forcing of the rhubarb. And here I have, to begin with, a clump of rhubarb which I brought in from my own garden at home and healed in here the other day. I'm going to dig this out and show you what a massive root you have. Now you may have rhubarb growing in your garden at home. You may not want to dig up all of the bed to force some of it, but you don't have to. Just say you might dig up every other plant. I want you to look down in here, if we can open up one of these buds. Now you begin to see what I'm looking for. You see that beautiful pink bud started down in here? All sorts of buds will be underneath these stalks. There's another one down in there. We'll be able to get from this clump of roots, oh, I would say 24 stalks, which we can force in the middle of winter and have the most delectable rhubarb that you can imagine. We'll just take this and put it into a box. You see I have a piece of plastic in here because I'm going to put this box down cellar. I don't want the soil all over the cellar floor. And just take that, put it in like so, fill some soil in around it. Now, this is going to sit right here until about the middle of January. I'm going to let it freeze just as solid as a rock. And then I'm going to bring it in to my cellar in a dark place, give it a drink of water in that warm cellar. It'll begin to grow and grow up here to about 2.5 feet or even 3 feet tall and get the most tender stems you can imagine. But if I want to be able to dig that, take this in the house next, not dig it, but take it in the middle of winter, I have to keep it in such a way that it won't be frozen to the ground. So you see what I have underneath here? Just a couple of bricks. You can pry that loose anytime during the winter. They'll be dry. Move that right inside and force the nicest rhubarb that you can imagine. Now let's go to Jerusalem artichokes. You've perhaps seen these plants during the winter time. Tall green things here must be 8 feet tall, way over my head. Had dark green foliage, rough to the touch. It eventually had some yellow flowers. Well, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the roots. Now, we call this the Jerusalem artichoke. Nothing to do with Jerusalem, nothing to do with true artichokes. This is a North American wild sunflower. The roots are what we're looking for, and they are delicious. I know that the Indians used to eat them, and I'd be willing to bet that on that very first Thanksgiving Day, the Pilgrims had what we now call Jerusalem artichokes to eat. So we'll begin by taking our lopping shears, just getting these old stalks right off the ground stem, something that we can get at the plant. These are really tough. There we go. Get those out of the way. Now we'll go at the digging process. We'll see what we find here. Now this is the payoff on the Jerusalem artichokes. I want you to see those beautiful roots all through here. Now if you've never tasted them, this is entirely different flavor, not like potatoes at all, but a root such as this can be boiled, it can be baked. I tell you, it's especially good when it's baked with lamb. This is the Jerusalem artichoke. Now when you go to dig these in the fall, I'd be willing to say anything. There's going to be a little piece like this left over in the soil that you miss. No matter what, it will come up in the spring. So once you've planted Jerusalem artichokes in your garden, you're going to have them in your garden from that time forward. You can't get every one of them when you dig in the fall. Now last year, Well, I haven't dug these, as you can see, but last year I had a piece no bigger than this, weighed somewhere around 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces, and from that I got a plant growing in this same spot, 10 pounds of roots. It's just an amazing harvest. We'll dig a few more of these and we'll see what we have underneath. Imagine a beautiful, beautiful harvest from these. This is the Jerusalem artichoke, and when someone calls it a sunflower, that is just right. It is a wild sunflower, grows along in the meadows on the sides of the road. Beautiful roots just like that. Well, now let's go from here and we'll dig some of the parsnips. Now I wanted to speak about parsnips as one of the unusual crops in this garden, in that it's been in the soil since April. And here it is November, and it's still occupying that same piece of ground. Most rows in this garden have produced 2 or 3 or even 4 crops in that length of time, but parsnip takes a long time to grow. I have in here 2 different varieties. The first one is one I've never grown before, a variety from Europe, from England, called White Jim. And then next to it, I have over here one called Harris Model. Now the Harris Model is an old-time favorite here in America and does very well. Let's dig a couple of these and see what we have. And this first one is White Jim. Well, there, that's what we're looking for. Now that is a beautiful parsnip. You can see the size of that root, the smooth skin that this has, the long taper. Now this may be a vegetable that you have never grown, but if you have never grown them, I must commend this to you. Absolutely delicious, very sweet tasting. All you really have to do is boil it to just a very small amount, add some butter and salt and pepper, and I think it's great. Now, someone else will tell you that they have to be sautéed and go into all sorts of fancy dishes, but you can't beat a parsnip, and they're better now that we've had a frost than they would be if I had dug them a few weeks ago. Now that was the White Gem. Let's see what we have here in Harris Model. Well, this Harris Model is, this particular root at least is, I hit it with my spade and broke it off, but it has a little crack at the end. It's not as large. The 2 of them side by side, I would certainly plant the White Gem again for next year. I understand that the people abroad are great on eating parsnips, and apparently they have grown some beautiful varieties. Well, now let's go inside the greenhouse, because I want to, another thing, before we go in the greenhouse, I want to talk to you about strawberry barrel, because during the summer, early this summer, I planted this strawberry barrel, which was an old nail keg. Cut some holes in here with a bit, 2 inches in diameter, you can see, and put the plants in. And what I did was to mix up about half and half a compost and ordinary garden soil, and put in a layer of the soil, and then as we came to the holes, we'd slip the plant in and add more soil. And finally, at the top, we put in this cone of wire, of hardware cloth, galvanized, filled with sand and gravel. So we can put moisture down in here and fertilizer, so that we can reach, the fertilizer and moisture will reach these lower plants during the summer. Notice that one of these plants is still trying to blossom. I saw one here with some frozen fruit on it a while ago. This is an ever-bearing variety, just never wants to quit. Well, so what do we do with it when the winter comes? If I were to leave this right out in the wind, first of all, that would freeze just like a rock. These evergreen leaves would be buffeted by the cold winds. They would dry out. The crowns of the plants, I'm afraid, would die. So I'm going to use an old trick, a piece of chicken wire, just 1/2-inch chicken wire made in a loop like that. Slip it over the top. Now that's easy enough. We'll fill in around that with leaves. Just ordinary leaves out of the garden, out of the lawn. so that we end up with a nice, you can see a windbreak around that, and all sorts of great protection. Now, one thing I must tell you, don't put this on until after the ground has frozen, because the field mice will get right in there, and believe me, they will enjoy a nice warm house for the winter, and they'll have strawberry plants to chew on at the same time. Well, now let's go in the greenhouse, because I have a very special plant I'd like to show you called the bridal veil. Now, the bridal veil is a member of the wandering Jew family. It's related to the Tradescantia. The Tradescantia is one of our fine perennials with blue, pink, or white flowers. If you look very closely at it, well, you can see this name, bridal veil. You may not need any special spelling on that, but this is bridal veil, and it gets its name from the fact that these flowers are so delicate. Each of these flowers, little white blossoms, has 3 petals, and blossoms rather continuously if the plant has good growing conditions. Good growing conditions for the bridal veil are these. We would like ordinary household temperatures around 70 degrees. There must not be full sun, but yet there has to be a lot of light. Without sufficient light, the plant doesn't blossom. The soil should stay moist at all times, and once a month, give it a drink with houseplant fertilizer, any houseplant fertilizer. I wouldn't mind if you cut that dilution about in half. We don't need a strong fertilizer, but we'd like some coming along all the time. Eventually, a plant like this can get straggly. If it does, just take your shears or your scissors and cut it right off to within an inch or an inch and a half of the pot. Just give it a real haircut, and it'll send out brand new growth again and be just as clean and bright as can be. At that time, if you want to, the plant seems too thick for you or pot bound, divide the plant with a knife into several pieces and have several plants instead of one. Now, if you don't want to go to that problem, you can take little plants like this, little pieces of the stem, roughly 3 or 4 inches long. I don't know if you can see it, but right here at this point, the new roots started right out in the middle of the air, such as this. We'll take these and put them here in some soil, ordinary soil. They root so easily, you don't even need rooting mix for them. You can set in, I would set in, maybe a half a dozen of these very easily from a plant such as this, and they will begin to grow very soon, and we'll fill this all in and have a plant as nice as this one in about 6 months' time. Now, this is a plant called the bridal veil. I think you'll really like it. It's rather new to the flower market. It's been around only a few years now, but one that I would commend to you highly. Now, let's just move this one out of the way a minute. We have another number of other things that we want to talk about today. And the first of them will be a sort of a progress report on what's been going on here in the greenhouse. Well, let's look here at a cyclamen. Now, the cyclamen is a plant which comes from the Near East. It's not hardy. This variety is not hardy. Beautiful house plant that will blossom from early November right until April. Comes in pink, red, white, lavender, and even purple. Has the foliage, which is just as nice as the flowers themselves. And besides the flowers on this young plant, you see the buds coming along that will give us blossoms over a long period. Now we can look at another plant which hasn't quite reached that stage. It's growing along, some buds are forming on it, but eventually it will be large enough to blossom. But it takes a long time to produce a cyclamen. Here are 2 more plants which I started from seed 5 months ago. Certainly no flowers there. I would say these plants have another 9 or 10 months to go before they'll be large enough to blossom. So if you have to pay some money for cyclamen, you know that someone has had to take care of it. I figure about 500 days and nights before it ever shows up in a flower shop. Well, now we'll look at another one, another plant such as the fuchsia. Now, the fuchsia is one that's been blossoming all summer long. This time of year, the plant begins to look straggly, so you should cut it off just like that so you have nothing but the stubs of the plants left. Doesn't look very prepossessing, but this is what the plant looks like after about 2 weeks after it's been cut back. Here you see lovely new growth coming. Now this new growth can be allowed to blossom this winter, or if you want many more plants, you can take cuttings and cuttings and cuttings all winter long, and next spring have 100 plants from the same one if you wanted to. And then here's a plant which is 2 years old. Isn't that a beauty? Cut back, sort of a bonsai treatment to it, you might say. But once that new growth starts growing, this being a trailing variety, it'll go over the sides of the pot and will give us a beautiful showing next year. This is a variety called Dark Eyes. Now in my plant clinic today, I have a Coleus, and I've been ducking underneath this plant from time to time, getting in here. I want you to notice what happens here. This is an old plant, and we have these long, long stems with leaves just at the tips. Pretty woebegone-looking specimen. Now, there are 2 or 3 things that could be done about it. One, I could cut it back right up at the pot level, but if I do that, I'll be left with a bunch of very hard, woody old stubs, which wouldn't make a very nice plant, no matter how much I begged it to grow. What I am going to do instead is to take tips, such as this, and cut them right off. I'll take something like this because this particular tip illustrates a special thing that I want to show you. Don't let your Coleus plants go to blossom. You can see the flower bud coming on the top of that. It's a rather an insignificant little blue flower, and they will blossom in the wintertime. I think most of us are interested in the foliage rather than the flowers, so we take off the flower stalks and prepare the cuttings like this to go into the soil. Now, I like to have cuttings have roughly 4 leaves or 5 or 6 leaves, no more than that. Now you can do this with any Coleus that you have, and you may have a variety that you really like. Well, I'm going to show you a very particular way to root a Coleus. Now, they do root very, very easily, but this is a trick that I have never shown on the air before, but one that you might like to try at home. We'll prepare another cutting here. I like to pinch the tip off the cutting to begin with because I'm interested in getting growth started from, we'll have 4 stems, 2 from there and 2 from there on this one cutting. So instead of rooting this in sand, which it would do but would then require transplanting, I'm going to take a little dowel and stick it in the soil like this. Now this is ordinary potting soil ready to grow. Take some sand. Now this is coarse builder's sand, which is sterile. And that's the thing that I want to be careful about. Something which does not have disease on it. We'll simply plug those cuttings right in the sand like that. I'll tell you what will happen. This will root, of course, in the sand. We won't lose any of these plants to decay or rotting off. Instead, the minute they get rooting, they will go on sideways right into the soil. And in 3 or 4 months, we'll have a plant that just covers this whole pot. Well, let's do that again. We'll just use the dowel, make a plug in it like so, and fill this plug up with sand. It could be perlite or any other kind of a rooting medium. Stick your cutting down in like that. I would say that on a plant such as this, you could easily put in, maybe 4 or 5 cuttings. This plant, you see, has so many. I could make 100 Coleus plants from this if I wanted to. There's just no end to the number of stems on this plant. But one of the things I do want to show you that when this plant gets growing, I'm not going to allow those single stems to go way down. I'll pinch them off just as I'm pinching the tips off these cuttings now so that the plant will be bushy. It's got to have a number of stems, and that way it never gets that long, lanky situation that we have here now on that old plant. A little bit of sand in the hole, stick the cutting down inside of that, and it's all ready to grow. Well, we're getting ready to answer some questions today. You notice I didn't even have to use rooting powder on the Coleus because they root so quickly. Well, my first question today is from Corinth, Mississippi. When can I plant English peas for spring? Well, you can plant English peas in northern part of Mississippi, or anywhere from the middle of February to the middle of March. And how I envy you. It'll be a long time after that before we can plant them here in Crockett's Victory Garden. This person writes from Ohio. We've been enjoying growth and bloom on our rhododendrons for 10 years. But late this summer, the nice green leaves on certain branches drooped from their normal position and gradually died. Can you prescribe a remedy? Well, what I'm sure happened to your plant is that it has been attacked by what's called the rhododendron borer. Now, this borer is a very small fly in mid-May. It flies around to the rhododendron plant, lays the eggs on the stems rather than the leaves, and those insects that hatch bore through the bark and into the stem and eventually kill the plant. So what you want to do is to use a material called methoxychlor, and you can see what this one is, methoxychlor. This is a good spray, and be sure to hit it very well underneath the leaves, all around the stems of the plant. I do not care about the outside of the plant, but the stems have to be hit. Do that 4 or 5 times at 20-day intervals, and you'll control that rhododendron borer. From New Hampshire, dear Mr. Crockett, I'm 12 years old, and my avocado plant is 10 years old. It's very tall, thin, and ugly. How can I make it branch out? In another year, it'll be up through the ceiling. Well, what you want to do is just to reach to the very tip of that plant and take off 1 inch or 2 inches or as much as you want to take off. That will force the energy to go sideways, and you'll get side branches instead of just one stalk. I can appreciate your dilemma. A card from Maine said, I have several blueberry bushes, would like to propagate them. When is the best time and how? Well, first of all, it's difficult to propagate blueberry bushes, but you do want to start them in late February or March. Take cuttings about 4 inches long, put them in peat moss, give them bottom heat about 70 degrees. They'll send out leaves, and eventually, after several weeks, some of them will send out roots. Well, that's all we have time for today. Next week, we're going to winterize our roses, and in our nursery bed where we have perennials, we're going to show you how to cover them for the winter. And then here in the greenhouse, I'm going to demonstrate how to hand-pollinate a cucumber. I'm Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden. I hope you enjoy the program every week.